People like to say, have a good day, and it's a nice sentiment, but it's a fixed perspective that can put a lot of pressure on us. It's also really hard to define from person to person. What about instead if we ask ourselves, how can I have a better day? At work, at home, in life? That's what this show is all about. The Have a Better Day podcast comes to you from Boon, a personalized coaching platform that helps businesses everywhere to support the whole humans, which are their employees. We have our pulse on what employees are dealing with in today's workplace, and we want to share those insights with you. Welcome to the Have a Better Day podcast. Here today with the legend, Hebba Youssef, founder of the I Hate It Here community, which you can find her 153,000 subscribers today to her podcast and amazing newsletter. And she's really just built an amazing safe space for HR leaders, no pun intended, to really be able to share challenges and really created an amazing community around that. So the topic today with Hebba, which is something that I feel like we've talked about in several conversations and is really a broader theme that I've heard about from people leaders today, is around this idea that HR leaders have become kind of the de facto therapist / performance coach / mentor across the organization. And it's become kind of difficult to draw the line on, where do you create boundaries and what should you be thinking about and what should you not in these conversations. So I feel like there's no better person to be able to talk about this with. And we're excited to have you here, Hebba.
Thank you so much for letting me be here and yapping on the pod. And I just love all of our conversations. I feel like we always uncover so much when we talk to each other.
All right. So Hebba, I think just starting off with this idea of, when I first became a founder, I think one of the things that I thought was really important to being a good leader for my team was kind of carrying that emotional baggage and really being able to handle that entire burden of my team until I realized that, I wasn't really building resilience in myself. I was kind of absorbing it. And it made me kind of start thinking about HR in a similar way, managers in a similar way. I guess would love to hear, have you ever had one of those moments where, someone was expecting you to coach them and your gut was like, I'm not really the right person for this right now. And what do I do here?
So many times. I think a lot of people just think like instinctively that HR is also fully equipped to be a coach in the organization. And I do think at the executive level, absolutely, that's part of our mindset is I have to coach everyone to get to where we want to go to a certain extent. But I think a few years ago, I was in a situation where I was not an executive and I was asked to coach an executive through something. And it was just an absolute mismanage of power and balance, where I was yes, I am HR and I can give feedback and guidance, but I think it's really hard to coach somebody at a level that's so much higher than yours when you haven't gotten there yourself. So I was asked to be in a situation to give this feedback to this person, coach them through how to work better with their team. And I had observed so much of it that I could give them really good feedback. But I thought it was really inappropriate that then I would go coach them as if I was an executive when I had never been an executive at that point, never experienced what they had experienced. And it was a function I had never worked in. And so I was this just feels like I'm set up to fail because where's the trust and all that? I think it's one thing to give feedback. It's a completely different thing to coach someone.
And what you're talking about kind of sounds like a hybrid of coaching and mentoring.
Yeah.
In terms of where do you draw the line between giving advice versus coaching? So I guess when you're talking about HR being a coach, what does that actually mean?
That's such a loaded question because it's so tough because across the organization, there are roles in HR. I think Netflix has a performance coach where they hire a specific performance person. And I'm not sure the role sits in HR, but I feel like it sits in HR. But I think
there's the Wendy Rhodes example of, pseudo therapist, pseudo performance coach.
Yeah.
That is her role.
I think there are times where HR plays the coach around processes and things we've built in the organization. like coaching a manager through how do I discuss a promotion? What do I do when an employee keeps asking me for X, Y, and Z? Like there are things about the organization and like processes we've put in place that I think we're well equipped to coach on. I also think like when you're at the executive level, coaching your executives to like be better storytellers, like understand the mission, answer questions, that type of coaching, I also think HR does. There's like this real coaching too. That's like professional coaching, the people that are out there and that's their profession. That type of stuff around like executive presence, how you show up, communication skills, conflict resolution. I think some of that, it's really hard to expect HR to be able to coach on it because we don't get any sort of, a lot of HR leaders don't get any sort of formal training on the things that we have to navigate every day.
Yeah, it does. It feels like there is, especially in small businesses and most companies that I've talked to, there's kind of this unspoken expectation that HR is serving as the coach for, or pseudo therapist for whatever it may be, more mental health related, leadership development related, conflict mediation, like kind of the one-stop shop resource. It seems like managers are being tasked in that sort of role as
Mm-hmm.
well. I guess, like, where does that tend to go off the rails in your experience? I mean, leading head of people team, like where
Yeah.
do you see that go off the rails? And I guess who's really paying the emotional toll in that conversation, and how does that build?
God, I think I've seen it go off the rails so many times. And I think everyone is carrying some emotional burden, but I think HR might carry the most. I don't know if that's like a hot take. Someone might not agree with that. But I think like we're expected to be that like one-stop shop of everything. And what I wish people understood is like that is an impossible expectation to put on someone. Like it's just unrealistic. Like we know so many things fall under HR, like comms, engagement, culture, recruiting, performance, all of it falls under HR. But I do think like there's become this expectation that like, okay, HR can execute all of this in the business, set up these processes, make sure they run, explain them to all the employees. Oh, and on top of that, they can also coach everybody through every single moment that they're feeling. And
Yeah.
I am like that. I'm out of my depth when it comes to that. Like there
Yeah.
are things that come to like mental health, well-being that I know how I would approach them as like me. Like here's
Yeah.
what I would do if I felt burnt out, right? But coaching someone through that is very different. And like I
Yeah.
think there's this interesting thing about humans is like we default and people filter their feedback through this too. We default to how we would handle things.
Right.
So like if you came to me and you were like, I'm burnt out, I would probably be like, let's talk about that. And I would probably give you feedback or coaching, if we're going to put coaching in parentheses, on what I would do because I'm not a trained professional in how to handle you in the moment you're in and the crisis you might be having.
Yeah, it's actually it's one of the areas that, we in our own coaching at Boone, one of the things that we hear a lot from employees who are going through the coaching program is like, I want to work with a coach who has, say they're an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
I want to work with a coach who's a former engineering
Mm-hmm.
leader so that they can speak my language.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think intuitively you think, well, that makes a lot of sense. You want somebody who can speak your lingo and whatnot. But kind of related to what you're talking about, it kind of does push your own biases on what you experienced as an engineer into that relationship, which, a lot of coaches will say not having that bias is actually really crucial for the overall relationship that you're going to be building with that employee. So to
Yeah.
your point, I think being able to remove yourself and your experience from that situation is a really tough thing, especially being in HR. It kind of feels like you're touching all different elements of
Yeah.
the organization. And I think such a big piece of this feels like it is, how can we remove some of our own bias from this situation? I guess, do you have like a specific story that comes to mind for you in terms of, like, obviously, whether it be a manager coaching you through or you coaching a manager through a specific situation? I guess anything come to mind in specific?
Yeah, I mean I coach our managers now, but I think it's tough because let's say a manager comes to me and they're in, I mean, you already used engineering, I'll use sales. I work with our sales managers closely. What if they came to me with like a thing they're trying to coach the employee through? Here's the here's how I would start the conversation. I would ask a lot of questions because I am not a salesperson. So
Yeah.
I don't even know what they're dealing with in their day to day. I only have like a 30-foot view of like what I think the organization is dealing with or like what people on my team are dealing with. And so I
Yeah.
think when you're in those situations, also it can get really frustrating for the employee themselves because they're like, well, why do I have to tell you about the sales process? Well, why do I have to explain why RFPs are frustrating? Well, there's this like client relationship that you would never understand. And like, that's why the employee showed up and acted like this. And I like see people when I'm coaching them get kind of annoyed with me at times, but I'm like, I don't have the context of all the things happening. So I have to ask the questions to be even able to like gauge my coaching in the right direction. And
Yeah.
even then, a lot of times I have to stop myself through filtering. Well, I would do that differently. You have to constantly like stop yourself when you're thinking like, why did they reply that way to the client? I would be like,
Yeah.
well, I would reply that way if the client hadn't replied to me in 3 to 5 days and then blamed
Right.
me for something, right? So you have to like
Right.
stop yourself from doing that and
Yeah.
actually then try to like put yourself in the employee's shoes. And I think that's where it gets really tricky is like a coach that's going to be their natural
Yeah.
instinct, right? It's going
Yeah.
to be to not have to filter through stopping themselves because they're a trained professional from trying to give advice to how they would do it and instead guide the employee to do it. Whereas we, when we're in HR, we're probably going to try to coach to what we think the employee should do. And
Yeah.
not to mention, like, we have our bias of being in the organization. So we
Yeah.
like know who's a tricky manager, who's a hard employee to work with. So like we might even then filter our feedback through that lens, which can be helpful. And I also think hurtful. Which is why when people are like, do you believe in the power of a coach? I'm like, there should be somebody external, third party, non bias who can give you advice and guide you through something. And it
Yeah.
shouldn't be your HR person.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think this brings up an interesting conversation around like, I mean, I mentioned, I know we're referring to this as coaching.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're describing from my, I guess, coaching knowledge lens, it does sound more like mentorship, where you are giving advice based on what you know about a certain topic and what your background is. And I feel like, I mean, I would love to have you as a mentor. You seem like an amazing mentor. And I guess,
Yeah, right.
I
Just
mean,
kidding.
I think you would be an amazing coach as well. I just want to make sure we are
Yeah.
defining these ideas of coach because they're,
Yeah.
anybody can be a coach, anybody can be a mentor, anybody can be a consultant. Like, I guess, how do you think about mentorship versus coaching? And I think some of the things that I typically think about is like coaching is typically very goal oriented, where it's like, okay, we're trying to put together somewhat of a structured approach on how we're going to help somebody get from point A to point B. And there's certainly going to be some of that guidance associated with it, but it is a lot of active listening and reflective listening and really kind of letting the employee kind of get to the answer in a lot of different ways. So I guess, how are you thinking about these situations of like, am I coaching here or am I mentoring?
I like honestly wish we should be like, let's define coaching. Let's define
Yeah.
mentoring, right? Like to everyone. Because I actually think it's like same, but different, right? Like
Yes.
a
Yes.
coach, I think both a coach and a mentor potentially this might be different. I don't know. I'll see what you think. I think a coach is definitely like more focused on the future. I think a mentor like might really be like more in a moment. Here's what worked for me. And so I think like a coach is meant to help you reflect, is meant to help you think. And I think sometimes a mentor is more so to help you act. And like, yes, a coach will also help you figure out how to move forward with clarity. But like, what I'm thinking is more so like a coach is like along the, they're, you are going on the journey with them. I think
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
mentor is somebody potentially who has gone on that journey alone and is
Yeah.
now telling you specifically how they did it to help you then do something similar.
Yeah.
And I do think like mentorship, while I've had mentors who sit outside of my function area, I do think like a mentor who sits in your function and maybe has the future career path you want
Yeah.
is sometimes better than somebody who doesn't. So like if I were to lay it out, like I've had a coach and a mentor at the same time, very different. Like I really used my coach to help me understand where are my gaps in like self-awareness and my ability and like reflect on why something was so frustrating for me. Like with one of my
Yeah.
earliest coaches, I worked on like where my source of frustration was coming from in the day to day.
Yeah.
with my mentor, I actually use my mentor to help me understand what is the business we're operating in, and like how do I become smarter and better about the business problems and how the function solves them and how to move forward, like leveraging their perspective on how they've navigated that exact scenario before.
Yeah, there's almost a more tactical element to what you're describing with the mentor relationship, which I think is consistent with the way I would think about it as well. And I mean, and that's where the coaching versus therapy
Hmm.
realm starts to get murky, where it's like, a lot of what we're describing around like understanding, what triggers me in moments, and how am I
Yeah.
processing that, and how is that helping me grow into a better leader. Well, that kind of sounds like therapy, right? So it's like, it's kind of this Venn diagram where it is this same but different sort of approach. And I think when we're talking about coaching versus therapy,
Yeah.
the way I tend to think about that is like, you are going to have some of that processing type overlap. But in therapy, it's typically, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm talking in circles with my therapist, who I love,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of like, okay, let's go back to understanding my childhood thoughts and behaviors and
Yeah.
understanding how that's shaped me into who I am today. Whereas coaching to me feels a little bit more like, okay, let's understand these triggers, and let's understand this self-awareness aspect to my background, but how do we move forward with this? And
Yeah.
how can we set some goals that are more future oriented associated with it, but it is a little bit more philosophical in nature.
Yeah. I think like we should make that Venn diagram. Like that should be something we make and release when we release this episode, because it's like there are overlaps between coaching, mentoring, and therapy. Like I
Yeah.
do think ultimately all of them help you on the quest of better understanding yourself and the
Yep.
context that you operate in.
Yep.
I think all three of them, that is at their core. But I think
Yeah.
like therapy is you're really talking to like a licensed professional. Like they're the person who's going to uncover that like potential childhood trauma, like the mental health, the anxiety, those types of things, the emotional responses, like why trauma, maybe you've had like your trauma response to certain things. Like I watched a TikTok that was like your hyper independence is a trauma response. And I was like, well, I didn't need that today. Like
Yeah.
that, guess I'll go talk to my therapist about that. Like literally wrote it down. Like, do you think I can't depend on people? Like, should we talk about this? That is something to like talk about with my therapist. Like if
Yeah.
I'm talking about it through with my coach, like, can I not depend on people? It's like, I think the coach would then be like, well, talk to me about your organization. Is there a high level of trust? A
Yeah.
mentor then might talk to me about, well, why can't you depend on people? Do you think it's like a skill that's missing? Like they might bring the nuance to like why in my specific function I can't depend on people. And a therapist might take it one step further and say, there's something from your past that is making you not trust those people. So I think it like all three of them, the Venn diagram is a great way to describe it. All three of them touch on something that like helps you better understand yourself and what you're dealing with.
Yeah, and we actually have a Venn diagram of coaching versus therapy on our
Cool.
website, if you want to check it
We
out,
had
and we really
mentorship.
should add mentorship
Yeah.
to that. And it was actually really interesting because I posted on LinkedIn. It must have been 4 years ago at this point. It was a while ago, but we actually had some MSWs say, well, that's not actually totally accurate, because there are forms of therapy that are more goal oriented and solution focused. Like, so, of course the haters come out of the
If
woodworks
someone
in
help
our,
us, we just want a
yeah,
definition. Like I mean, I think they're all intertwined.
yes, yes. I think that's the long and short of it.
Yeah.
But I think like at the root of this conversation though, like Hebba is awesome. We know that. But why is HR, like, why has HR become the default, like, I guess, emotional dumping ground for so many organizations? Like, how does that happen?
I have no idea. I'm honestly like, where did we fall asleep in the story and wake up at this plot point? Because this is not what I wanted. I think during COVID, COVID truly was like a God, there's going to be books written about the year 2020, honestly, because so much happened. But I think during COVID, people like honestly didn't know what to do, right? Like we were dealing with like a global pandemic, hospitals were overrun, therapists were maxed out, and people were like, well, I guess I can go talk to my HR person about this. Now my HR person is telling me about diseases and and social distancing and washing our hands, why wouldn't our HR person also be able to tell us how to navigate this really tricky ground with our family members who
Yeah.
aren't respecting our boundaries?
It's to be the same thing.
And so I think like it kind of started in 2020. And then I don't know why we never went back to being like, this is not our job. I do remember in 2020, at one point, an employee came to me about something, and I actually had to say, "Hey, I'm so sorry. I'm here to support you in the organization. If it's like an organizational problem, a manager problem, something with one of our processes, I am not equipped or qualified to talk to you about what you are talking to me about. I highly encourage you get a therapist." And then I was like, here's our EAP if you need to talk to someone immediately. Like, here's how you find a therapist in network. I'm like, that is a discussion for your therapist. I drew
Yeah.
that line very quickly because I honestly felt like it was inappropriate for me to give the person any sort of guidance. I was like, I'm out of my depth here. But I
Oh,
do,
there's
sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, people come to us for things like this all the time, Alex. And every
Right.
time I'm like, that's a therapy question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you bring up the mental health side of the coin.
Yeah.
I think there's also the like professional murky area where like is this confidential or like am I representing the company? I guess like where do I can understand like wanting to refer to, if you have a therapy platform that
Yeah.
you use at the company or whatnot, but I guess if it is more professional related, I guess like how do you navigate that safe space confidential element with having to be a representative of the company?
I think it's so tricky. It is very hard.
Yeah.
For a while, I used this phrase where I would tell the employees, like, you can disclose things to me, but I just want to like remind you, I am your HR person. Meaning, if like you do tell me anything along the lines of you're going to hurt yourself or hurt the company, I like have to go take serious action on either of those. So I would just caveat when they would come to me with things. But like mental health, I feel like it became like this buzzword. Everyone was like, oh, we're all burnt out. Put your oxygen mask on before you put on anyone else's. If I hear that phrase one more time, bleh, barf. Like, I don't want to hear it anymore. And it was like suddenly like HR people became the people to talk about this because things at work do impact people's mental health. There's that study recently that was like your manager has more of an impact on your mental health than your partner, the
Yeah.
person you spend your life building things with, right? Your manager. And so I think like where HR, where there's like a line is like if someone at work is doing harm to others in terms of mental health, I think that's where HR can intervene to the point where it's like, hey, we have a process for that. Or, hey, it looks like the employee's reaching max bandwidth. We need to adjust their work. Those are the types of conversations I think HR is equipped to have. But if it comes to like general mental health,
Yeah.
diagnosing people, helping them understand the use of like different medicines, like that's none of my business. And I should not be talking about that with an employee. And that's where like if that starts to come up, I will
Yeah.
say to them like, I'm so sorry. I'm not equipped to have this conversation with you. I really need you to like go explore X, Y, and Z.
I guess if you were to, because it does feel like, I mean, would you say there's been a shift in how employees are viewing HR since the start of COVID in this sort of capacity? Like,
Yeah.
I guess, would you, if you were to rewrite like the HR BP job description today, like, how does this skill set funnel into that? Like, do you kind of have to think about rewrite? And I think all of this applies to managers as well, which I find so interesting because there is that same like pseudo therapist, coach, mentor dependency on the manager, and neither of those skill sets are really trained for. Like HR leaders they're not trained on how to be this for their employees, yet all of a sudden they're being required to be. Same thing goes for new managers.
Yeah. I think you're exposing like a very real pain point that HR people feel every day
Yeah.
is like, how do we navigate the new normal of the world where, back when they were like, bring your whole self to work. And it's like, I mean, some people can, like, that's a whole other conversation. But I do think like the world outside doesn't stop moving when I open my computer to log on to Slack or open an email. And so I think there is some nuance where managers, leaders, HR needs to understand what is happening? Like, what signs are there that there's like a distressing situation happening?
Yeah.
And then it's on us. Like, I don't think we can fix every distressing situation, but I do think there are things within our power, like bandwidth, setting goals that are too extravagant and ridiculous, burning people, like hours worked, stuff like that, that I think that's the work we should be focused on. Like, how do we make it better for the person when they open their computer, not make it worse?
Yeah.
And I don't think I have the right answer, Alex, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, I do believe in the power of hiring external coaches because there's only so many hours in the day, and none of us are given any sort of formal training on how to do anything,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. Well, I think even at a basic level, I feel like there is, and we've seen this with a lot of customers, this idea of like building a coaching culture where you're at least providing some frame of reference for your leaders to understand what it means to coach people,
Yeah.
to build some of that foundational knowledge around being in that new position. Because, I mean, I think a lot of what we talked about in our recent panel was like you being a successful individual contributor. A lot of this stuff you actually have to unlearn
Yep.
to be a successful leader. So it's like, how can you establish some of this coaching culture at a high level in your organization?
Yeah. And now imagine we're like trying to figure that out as HR while also just like navigating the day to day of work, while also trying to figure out what's happening in the world, while also worrying about our economy because that will impact our company's like anyone's company's performance, money, revenue, profitability. While like we're dealing with a lot, I would say, like the cup runneth over. I make that joke so many times. And it's also like I'm dealing with all of these things and I'm also trying to support these employees, but then the business comes first, but then I have to go do this. And it's like the never ending push and pull of where do I actually focus my attention? And I
Yeah.
think like my guidance to HR people has been like, if you are not a certified coach, if you don't have that framework already built in you,
Yeah.
potentially giving yourself and focusing on that actually does more harm to your organization and to your professional career than if you just went out and found somebody to help you do it. It's
Yeah.
why I believe in the power of like coaching.
Yeah.
So I'm like, there should be a resource for employees. If the employee's first gut is to just come to HR with every problem, one, a lot of employees don't trust HR. Two, the ones that do trust HR and come to us constantly are going to expect that like very hyper personalized experience that I talked about in the beginning is sometimes impossible to deliver.
Yeah.
So that it's like a never ending problem. I'm like always trying to solve. Like when people come to me and they're like, I really want to build a high performance culture. I'm like, okay, what do you have in place right now? And they're like, reviews. And I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, we got good luck. Like
Yeah.
that is not going to bear the outcome. I think a lot of times we put processes in place that we think will get us what we want instead of actually focusing on like, how do we solve the root cause of the problem? And the root cause is like, we are all humans who want and need different things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been kind of pounding the pavement of the key, and I think this is one of the things that I'm pretty excited about with AI is that I think that the biggest need that is not being met from a professional or personal development lens in businesses today is just how do you personalize at scale?
Yep.
And I mean, that's something that we've tried to do at Boone in an affordable way where you're getting access to this personalized, affordable, scalable coaching model that does have the unique needs of every employee that's being met. But I think AI unlocks that in like a whole different sort of way. I guess without going completely off the rails quickly, like, I mean, you're kind of talking about, building a high performance culture and I mean, HR leaders not really even knowing where to start. It does feel like there's been this huge shift from like HR being more of an administrative function to now being like the strategic people development arm of the business. Yet you're still expected to manage that whole administrative side of the business as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if you were to wave a wand and like reset what HR's function within an organization looks like right now, I guess what does that look like for you?
Mm. It's like really understanding intimately the business. Like I think that piece, when you really understand your business model, the levers of growth, what costs HR, your COGS, all of that, I actually think that like you can build better people strategy. So if like I could wave a wand, it would be like HR sits at the intersection of like the business strategy and the people strategy. And we're then given resources to arm the people strategy. And I don't think the resources is just internal headcount. I see so often people are like, I just want headcount to do that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
or like headcount is expensive. It's a salary fully baked. It's like we pay taxes or benefits. Like there's a lot of interesting ways I think that like you can actually augment your people team to get
Yeah.
the results you actually want that then delivers that like hyper personalized experience to your employees. I think it is honestly unrealistic that HR could do all of that.
Yeah. Do you feel like if you're you guys are a VC backed
Mm.
startup, and there's a lot of VC backed startups that are out there today, I guess, do you feel like that is the modern approach with a lot of newer organizations today? Is there this like dichotomy between the older, I guess those who have the title of more of like human resources or CHRO? Like, is there a different sort of view in the organization for those folks versus the newer organizations that are kind of thinking about it through like VP of people slash
Yeah.
L&D
Yeah.
side? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we're having like an identity crisis in HR. Honestly, this might be like my own self-inflated view because I feel like I'm always at the center of like an existential crisis every day, like my entire life. But I do think we're at like an interesting identity crisis as like a function
Yeah.
because more than ever before has been asked of HR in the last 5 years. Like truly, if you were not working in HR in 2020, I think this is the analogy I made recently. I was like, if you are still in HR after you were in HR during COVID and you're still in HR and you didn't leave and go fractional or like pick a different job or like, you're just like built different. Like I have so many white hairs from the year 2020 to 2022 because like 2020 was wild.
Can't
And
see them.
2021 was wild. Then 2022, every year it just keeps getting wilder. I'm like, can we chill? Can
Yeah.
we get a chill year one year? We're not. But I think what we're seeing is like a lot of HR people are like rising to the occasion because we're like, yes, for
Yeah.
so long, we've been kind of like the planning party committee, the fun police, for lack of a better way. I've started at 2 companies, and at both companies on the first day, somebody said, HR is here. We can't have fun anymore. And I'm like, okay. So like we're dealing with this like identity crisis from what we used to be to where I think we want to go. And I see more HR people actually becoming CEOs, which makes me so excited.
Yeah.
Because other than like your business IP, your next most valuable asset is your people. And the person directly responsible for their success is your HR leader. And so I think we're at this part in our history where so much has been asked of us. And I feel like we've really proved ourselves with some of this stuff that I think people are starting to look at HR as like, holy cow, the only way we can reach our strategic goals is by having a really strong HR person who understands the ins and outs of our business and our people.
I totally agree. I do think there is with any sort of like transformation, there are roadblocks to this. And
Always.
I do think HR leaders are in need of a inspirational voice to help guide them through this transformation. So I think you have been and like continue to lean into that sort of role because I think you're doing a great job with it. Just
Thank
by
you.
my 2 cents.
I mean, the call's coming from inside the house, Alex, let me tell you.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know how much more. Like, I joke, I'm like, I don't know if I could do this for another 10 years. Like, there's so much you're battling in HR every day. There are so many like hidden battles that no one sees. And I do think like it attracts the most empathetic and compassionate people who want to help others, which is also why I think my like theory is why we like ended up in this weird therapy mentor coach situation because we care so much and we want to help the people.
Yeah. Well, you would not be surprised to know that, let's say the most common like operator background that get ICF accreditation that become boon coaches,
Mm-hmm.
they're former HR leaders. Like that's the most common corporate background that become certified coaches because it's like you're built that way.
Right. You just want to help
You're built
people.
to care, you're built to manage people in that sort of way. So
Heavy is the head that wears that crown. Some days
yeah,
I'm like, man, if I didn't care about any of you, my life would be so much easier. Like, I would not be behind closed doors writing like 18 different comms, like making sure everybody knew everything, like listening to everyone's hopes and dreams. Like, I wish sometimes I could turn that off, but I think that's like what makes an organization, and organizations of the future are going to be the ones who really understand that like personalization piece you brought up, that like every person at work is different and unique, and they
yeah,
need something differently to do their best work.
yeah.
And like, I can't do that. I can't offer that to every single person.
And I guess we can end it today
Mm.
with I always like people to walk away with a few like actionable takeaways.
Always.
So I guess in the spirit of where should HR stop coaching today? Three quick hitters.
Okay. We should definitely not be coaching if somebody is dealing with a mental health crisis. Like, that to me is like clear therapist. I really do believe that that is, if you see somebody struggling, it's like you don't need to put your coach hat on. You need to go make sure they understand the resources and speak to a professional. I do think this is like maybe a controversial one. I think when it's a legal situation, like there's a law involved,
Yeah.
we potentially should not be coaching someone through that situation. We should be working with a lawyer and a
Yeah.
actual professional who understands all the implications. Also, it's really hard to coach someone through a legal situation when you have a responsibility to the company.
Yes. Yeah.
So, like,
You don't want to be in the crosshairs.
yeah, like if somebody's like, hey, I think I'm dealing with discrimination, you shouldn't be like, let me put my coach hat on right now and
Yeah.
tell you. It's like you as the HR person should have an alarm bell go off and be like, oh, there's something very serious going on here. And there's another set of procedures that we have
Yeah.
to follow, that we make sure we do right by the law and by the employee. I think that is just like a really big one. Another hot take on when we shouldn't be coaching is like when we're, I think this touches on this last one, like when we are not the neutral party. I think it's really hard sometimes because we want to believe we are neutral, and a lot of times we're not. Like there's a conflict of interest in a lot of things that I think make it tough. I work with two co-founders.
Yeah.
I think like me coaching them sometimes is really tough because I'm like, how am I supposed to be neutral? And I report to one of them, but I'm
Right.
trying to help the other. But they're also, they have a relationship. So
Yeah.
how do I operate here? And even if I'm supposed to be doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those are all, I mean, I think the challenging part of all of this is like, yeah, but what am I supposed to do when like there's no other resources available? And I think that's what a lot of HR leaders
Yeah.
fall into. So I think I guess where do you go from there?
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, if you have the luxury of having external resources
For
available to
sure.
you, you
Yeah.
know, that's the first option. But I guess if you're a small business that's really bootstrapped, how do you think about this?
God, you could go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT for advice. I don't necessarily know if I would recommend that, honestly, because that's just going to give you advice from the internet.
Yeah.
This is, I feel very privileged to give this advice. So I might have to like think through as I'm talking about it out loud. I think it's okay to say I'm out of my depth here.
Yeah.
And if you have the trust and the vulnerability with the people you work with, they will respect you more when you say, I'm out of my depth here. I can't actually get us through this next stage. We need to either go get help, or you need to go figure it out
Yeah.
on your own.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
been tough. I think it's tough for me personally because I never want to admit defeat.
Yeah.
But there are certain situations that just, if you in your gut feel like this is not right, you should stop and ask yourself, why do you feel like this is not appropriate for you? And then you should think to say, can I say this is out of my depth? Is there another executive or somebody who can support me through saying, I don't think this is appropriate for HR? And like, speak up. Because I think the worst thing you can do is take something on that is ultimately like you're not equipped to handle it. And you can actually do so much more harm than
Yes.
good. That
Yeah.
harm piece is really scary. So
Yeah.
like, I would not take on that risk.
Yeah. And I think in the spirit of like where do things go off the rails, I think that it's like stuff that you probably know deep down that you shouldn't be the one giving advice on or coaching on.
Yeah.
but there might be fear that like I should be the person who is giving this advice. So you kind of have to go through with it. But I think that's a great thing to end on, is just don't be scared to say, I really don't know, but I'm going to help you find the right resource that
Yeah.
can.
Or I will say, and this is like a personal plug, I have an HR leader community called Safe Space, and there's like a free you can literally log in for free if you have like 5 years of experience in HR, become a member right away, and you can actually ask a network of 4,000 people leaders, how would you all handle this? And I think like the biggest life hack for me was like making friends in HR.
Yeah.
And now we have a group text where I'm like, holy cow, you all, I just encountered this really tricky issue. What would you all do? I made them get on a call with me like 2 weeks ago. I was like, call, here's my problem. What do you all think? Here's how I would solve it. What do you all think? And like, it was 4 people with combined, all of us had 50 to 80 years of experience on that call. And I was able to be like, holy cow, okay, I know what I have to do now.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great other option, is like, how do you find a community that is also dealing with the same challenges to what you are? So Safe Space, obviously a really good place to be able to do that. And I think we can probably end on that note. And Hebba, I guess, beyond Safe Space,
Yeah.
where can folks find you today?
Oh God, on LinkedIn, I'm so annoying. I'm there all the time.
The meme lord.
I'm always posting memes. The algorithm does not really like the memes right now, but I don't give a shit. I'm going to keep posting my memes because
Through the algo.
They're funny to me. And I'm like, y'all are clearly prioritizing other content, but I'm going to prioritize what makes me laugh, which are my memes. No, LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is a good, first of all, I just say like LinkedIn has a ton of people creating content for free all day long. Just like tread carefully on what you believe or don't believe. But like if you also are in need of something, someone probably has talked about it on LinkedIn. You just need to ascertain, is this person an actual expert and able to talk about it, or an influencer who just wants to have a hot take?
Yeah. And you also have a community of 150,000 HR leaders at this point?
That read the newsletter, 153, which is so scary. Why are all of you reading?
153. That's a big milestone.
Yeah,
And
why are you
where do we find you for that? Is that ihateithere.com? Or
yeah,
what is
it's like hateithere.co, but honestly, you could Google I Hate It Here. And right now, Taylor Swift and I are battling for SEO priority because she has a song called I Hate It Here. And it really ruined me because I was like, listen, Taylor,
you got to change.
You got to change your song name.
T Swift, come on.
Yeah, it was a bad song anyway. Sorry. Also, a controversial hot take. I hated that song, so it made me even angry. I was like, it couldn't even be a good song.
I hate that song. I hate it here, and I hate this song.
Yeah. So I'm everywhere.
Awesome. Well, Hebba, thank you so much. This was great. I always enjoy talking to you.
Thanks.
And we'll be in touch.
Can't wait.